Speaker.
Present us, O Lord, in all our doings with thy most gracious favor, and further us with thy continued help, that in all our works begun, continued, and ended in thee, we may glorify thy holy name, and finally, by thy mercy, attain everlasting life. Amen. Introduction of guests. I recognize a member from Saskatoon Westview.
Mr. Speaker, I would request leave for an extended introduction.
Leave has been requested for extended introduction. Is leave granted? Carried.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to introduce a couple of people from our caucus office. Jana Lewis is a product of Moose Jaw, and she grew up on a farm in the Petrolia community about 15 miles southeast of Moose Jaw, and is the youngest of 3 siblings. Give us a wave. Thank you. Jana loves traveling, spending time with friends and family, and she credits her love for people to her dad, Hartford, and her late mom, Linda. She is very proud of her daughter, Faith, and has worked in various healthcare and human services fields. Jana worked as a coordinator for Moose Jaw Family Services before joining our caucus office in September of this year. Jana is a delight to be around and sets a happy, positive tone in our office. More importantly, Mr. Speaker, Jana also makes excellent cheesecake. I'd also like to introduce Nule Manegbo, that hails from Ogoni land in southern Nigeria. Nule credits her mother, Victoria Manegbo, and her late father, Debum Bariko Manegbo, and their unwavering faith in God for bringing her family to Canada and instilling great core values in her. She thanks God for her multifaceted siblings, Tuanbari, Dumsiri, Corley, Legbo, Alelo, and Mene Doom, and her vast number of friends, the building staff, and her co-workers for being a blessing to her life. Nule loves food and cherishes her nephews Joseph and Noah. She is excited for all the opportunities that lie ahead and gives glory to God. Please help me in welcoming Nule and Jana to their Legislative Assembly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the Minister of Highways.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you and to all members of the Assembly, I'd like to welcome back to the Legislature my wife, Megan, who's able to join us here in your gallery today, Mr. Speaker. And if you asked her, Mr. Speaker, I bet you today would be her favorite day of the session because it's the last day of session. And so now I get to go home and spend a little bit more time around the Battlefords. But in all seriousness, Mr. Speaker, I always am thankful because, you know, if it weren't for her, Mr. Speaker, I wouldn't have moved to Saskatchewan. If it weren't for her, I wouldn't have the opportunity to live in the Battlefords, the community that we're proud to be a part of. And, you know, every day, every week, I get to see her passion for her community and making it a better place in our great province. And I'm sure glad that I get to play a small role in that here, Mr. Speaker. So I'd ask all members of the Assembly to join me in welcoming Megan to her legislature. While I'm on my feet, Mr. Speaker, I'd also like to welcome to the legislature my Chief of Staff, Lee Goose, who he's told me this morning he hadn't been in the House for a couple of years, and I know he's no stranger to our caucus as he's worked in our caucus office for a number of years. Very grateful to have Lee join me this summer, and he does incredible work keeping me in line and making sure we're engaging with all of our stakeholders all across the province. So I'd ask all members to join me in welcoming Lee to his legislature.
Recognize a member from Regina Pasqua.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, to you, through you, to all the members of Assembly, I would like to introduce Mr. Bill Armstrong, sitting in your gallery. Bill worked in this building as a ministerial assistant to Minister of Finance and Justice Gary Lane during Devine's government from 1984 to 1988. He also worked in a communication at Sasktel, and he was provincial media liaison officer during the royal visit in 1989. I'm so proud to have him living in Regina Pasqua constituency, Mr. Speaker, and thank you very much, Bill, for your service. Right beside Bill, his daughter Jill Struder sitting here, and right on the dad's footstep, she is also working in Minister of Education and Communication. I ask all the members to join me welcoming Bill and Jill to their Legislative Assembly.
Recognize the member from Regina Rosemont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Seated in your gallery is someone who this is familiar to all in this Assembly, someone that would be seated here and serving through the clerk's office for 12 years, Mr. Speaker, and it's a pleasure to have Stacey Ursulescu back in Saskatchewan for a visit here this week. Mr. Speaker, of course, Stacey served her province in this legislature with distinction. I've known Stacey all the way back through high school at Tom Collegiate, Mr. Speaker, and her partner Sean are really awesome people, Mr. Speaker. I know that they've moved out to BC. Stacey's working for the school board out there, Mr. Speaker, and I know that they're really embracing all the outdoor and mountain pursuits. But I ask all in this Assembly to welcome Stacey back to the Saskatchewan Legislative Assembly. Well, on my feet, Mr. Speaker, I notice a guest up in the not a guest, but a citizen of Saskatchewan that's in the East Gallery here today, Mr. Speaker, Jeff Walters, an instructor out at the University of Regina in sociology. He also serves as leader of the Saskatchewan Liberal Party. I see he's rather active on Twitter some days, Mr. Speaker. Sometimes I agree with what he's saying, sometimes I disagree, but what I appreciate is that he cares about his province. I ask all members to welcome him to his Assembly. And while on my feet, Mr. Speaker, in the East Gallery, I see a young, good-looking rugby player up there with a Scottish rugby jersey on, maybe a young flanker or something. Welcome, TV Don Young.
Here, here.
Recognize the member from Regina Pasqua.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a 10-second introduction. Sitting in your gallery, it's Murtaz Ahmed. He is my casual CA, helping me in my office. Also would like to welcome Dylan Moran, sitting on the West Gallery. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member from Yorkton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To you, through you, to all members of the Assembly in your gallery. I want to introduce Fred Hill again today, but only because Chaplain Pastor Fred Hill has a very special person with him, is Helena Hill, his wife. She's worked with the City of Regina as a manager of sewer and drainage for 13 years. I've actually known her for, I think, longer than Fred, actually, because I went to school with her back in Yorkton, and in conversation with her, she says, you know, Greg, I don't remember you in high school. So, you know, I remember Helena. But, Mr. Speaker, I ask all members to welcome Fred and, of course, Helena Hill to their Legislative Assembly.
Recognize a member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wanted to take a moment to quickly introduce no stranger to this Legislative Assembly. Seated in the West Gallery, Dylan Moran. He is, of course, a self-advocate, a tremendous asset to the disability community in this province, Mr. Speaker, a huge proponent for equal work for equal pay. I know he just got off his shift at the Ukrainian co-op and made his way to today's proceedings. He's a regular observer. So I want to thank him and welcome him to his Legislative Assembly, Mr. Speaker.
Here, here.
Recognize a member from Kenora Pelly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you, in the West Gallery, I'd like to introduce a friend that I met in August on the second flight coming from Ukraine, Mykola Perun. He is currently working here at the Scotiabank in Regina, and he's looking forward to bringing his wife and his 3 kids here early in the new year. And he's already interested, and I'm working with him to get his Canadian citizenship. And this is going to be his first Christmas, so I'd like to say Vitaimo de Saskatchewan, Christos Rzdaitse Chislevo no Horoku, and welcome him to his Legislative Assembly.
Presenting petitions, I recognize the member from Lloydminster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to read the petition. We, the undersigned residents of the province of Saskatchewan, wish to bring to your attention the following: that the Liberal NDP federal government continues to infringe on the constitutional rights of the province of Saskatchewan and implement policies that are detrimental to our province's economic well-being, that the commitments and actions of the federal government have made the control of Saskatchewan's resource rights unclear, that an unsupportive federal government will continue to impede Saskatchewan's potential to play a global role in providing resources to the world market. We, in the prayer that reads as follows, respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan take the following action: to call upon the Government of Saskatchewan to implement Saskatchewan First policies and legislation that will support the development of Saskatchewan as a global supplier of food, fuel, and fertilizer without federal infringement on Saskatchewan's constitutional authority. The undersigned come from Yorkdale, Saskatchewan, and Sylvania, Saskatchewan. I do so present.
Reading and receiving petitions, statements by members. I recognize the member from Saskatoon, Churchill Wildwood.
Mr. Speaker, in the coming weeks, families across the province will gather to celebrate the birth of Jesus Christ. This is a festive time for reconnecting, sharing food, and appreciating the importance of friends, family, and faith. This year, Saskatchewan welcomed new friends who had to leave their homeland because of war. While this is an abstract reality for many, the hardship of leaving family is far too real for nearly 3,000 Ukrainians now in Saskatchewan. This is an old story we have seen far too many times before, but this story has, at its foundation, faith in a better future. This is the faith Mary demonstrated when the angel Gabriel came to her, proclaiming she would bring forth the Son of God. It is this same faith that strengthens people in times of danger when they are forced to leave the land they love. And this is what the Christmas story is ultimately about: a people who had faith that God would send a Savior to heal the world. And faith was fulfilled through the birth of Jesus, the Prince of Peace. While this is a time of celebration, Christmas can also be a time when some feel alone. Not everyone will admit they are struggling. So I encourage everyone to reach out to those around you. Be the bearer of good tidings and the light of hope. From my family to yours, Merry Christmas and all the best in the new year.
Recognize the member from Regina Lakeview.
Mr. Speaker, it's the last day of this legislative session, and for this Assembly, for the staff that work in our caucuses, in ministers' offices, and throughout this building, today marks the unofficial beginning of the holiday season. And I know that things can get heated in here, both by the friction of debate and sometimes hot air from the hardiest of hecklers. But on a day like today, waking to a wind chill approaching -50, I wonder what hint Jack Frost might be sending to us. And so, Mr. Speaker, I rise to wish good health and good cheer to you, to all members, and to everyone across Saskatchewan. We do this work because we know that it matters. Although often divided on the means, when we're at our best, I believe we all share in the desired ends: to make Saskatchewan a better place, a more prosperous place, a happier, healthier place for all. Unfortunately, some amongst us may struggle to find joy this season. We wish for them better times in the days and months to come. And to that end, may we act to comfort those in need. Whatever your faith or your traditions, I hope the holidays bring light, love, and laughter during our longest nights. And on behalf of the official opposition, I wish a most Merry Christmas to all. Thank you.
Recognized member from Regina Northeast.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will be extending my Christmas greetings today in Hindi, the national language of India, and then in my mother tongue, Punjabi. आने वाले हफ्तों में प्रांत भर के परिवार यीशु मसीह के जन्म का जश्न मनाने के लिए इकट्ठा होंगे। यह फिर से जुड़ने, भोजन साझा करने और दोस्तों, परिवार और विश्वास के महत्व की सराहना करने के उत्सव का समय है। इस साल सस्कैचुअन ने नए दोस्तों का स्वागत किया, जिन्हें युद्ध के कारण अपनी मातृभूमि छोड़नी पड़ी। जबकि यह कई लोगों के लिए एक अमूर्त वास्तविकता है, पर इन दिनों में परिवार छोड़ने की वास्तविकता लगभग 3000 यूक्रेनियनों के लिए बहुत अधिक वास्तविक है, जो अब सस्कैचुअन में हैं। हमें गर्व है हम उनके काम आ सके। श्रीमान स्पीकर, लोग जिन्हां ਨੂੰ ਵਿਸ਼ਵਾਸ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਪਰਮੇਸ਼ਵਰ ਸੰਸਾਰ ਨੂੰ ਠੀਕ ਕਰਨ ਲਈ ਇੱਕ ਮੁਕਤੀਦਾਤਾ ਭੇਜੇਗਾ ਅਤੇ ਇਹ ਵਿਸ਼ਵਾਸ ਯਿਸੂ ਮਸੀਹ ਸ਼ਾਂਤੀ ਦੇ ਪ੍ਰਤੀਕ ਦੇ ਜਨਮ ਦੁਆਰਾ ਪੂਰਾ ਹੋਇਆ ਸੀ। ਹਾਲਾਂਕਿ ਇਹ ਜਸ਼ਨ ਦਾ ਸਮਾਂ ਹੈ, ਪਰ ਕ੍ਰਿਸਮਸ ਵੀ ਇਹੋ ਜਿਹਾ ਸਮਾਂ ਹੋ ਸਕਦਾ ਹੈ ਜਦੋਂ ਕੁਝ ਲੋਕ ਇਕੱਲੇ ਮਹਿਸੂਸ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਨ। ਹਰ ਕੋਈ ਸਵੀਕਾਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰੇਗਾ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਸੰਘਰਸ਼ ਕਰ ਰਿਹਾ ਹੈ। ਇਸ ਲਈ ਮੈਂ ਹਰ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੂੰ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਆਲੇ ਦੁਆਲੇ ਦੇ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਤੱਕ ਪਹੁੰਚਣ ਲਈ ਉਤਸ਼ਾਹਿਤ ਕਰਦਾ ਹਾਂ, ਖੁਸ਼ਖਬਰੀ ਅਤੇ ਉਮੀਦ ਦੀ ਰੋਸ਼ਨੀ ਬਣਨ ਦੀ ਬੇਨਤੀ ਕਰਦਾ ਹਾਂ। ਮੇਰੇ ਪਰਿਵਾਰ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਮੈਰੀ ਕ੍ਰਿਸਮਸ ਤੇ ਹੈਪੀ ਨਿਊ ਈਅਰ। ਥੈਂਕ ਯੂ ਮਿਸਟਰ ਸਪੀਕਰ।
Recognized member from Saskatoon University.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 1948, the United Nations General Assembly adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This year marks the 75th anniversary of that declaration on December 10th. The Declaration states that we each have inherent rights as human beings, regardless of race, religion, gender, language, politics, property, birth, ability, or status. According to the United Nations, the promise of the Declaration of Dignity and Equal Rights has been under a sustained assault in recent years. Unfortunately, we don't have to look very far to see human rights violations here in Saskatchewan. Just this past month in Saskatoon, a man froze to death because he didn't have a place to live. Within the past year, we were reminded of the horrors of residential schools as over 1,700 unmarked graves of Indigenous children were located across the country, including right here in Saskatchewan. Young people in Saskatchewan are taking their own lives due to terrible access to mental health services. And here at home, we have the highest rates of domestic violence of all the provinces, over double the national average. We have a lot of work to do in this province, Mr. Speaker, and so I ask that all members fully commit themselves to promoting and upholding the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Thank you.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon, Stonebridge, Dakota.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Dans les semaines qui suivent, les familles à travers le Saskatchewan vont venir ensemble pour célébrer un joyeux Noël. C'est un temps surtout spirituel, mais aussi de fête et de famille. Et c'est un temps de paix dans tous les sens. Nous sommes bénis dans cette province de vivre en paix, d'avoir les ressources économiques et sociales, les possibilités de pouvoir offrir à ceux qui vivent ou qui arrivent ici une bonne vie. Il fait froid, mais la chaleur de cordialité, gentillesse et générosité qui font partie du peuple du Saskatchewan me rend toujours tellement fière. Joyeux Noël à mes collègues et à toutes et à tous, pour un temps de paix, de réflexion et de bonheur ce Noël. Merci.
Recognize a member from Regina Pasco.
शुक्रिया जनाब स्पीकर। हर साल दिसंबर 25 तारीख को ईसाई लोग अपना बड़ा दिन यानी क्रिसमस मनाते हैं। इस त्यौहार को लोग अपने घरों को सजाते हैं, रिश्तेदारों और दोस्तों के साथ मिलकर तरह तरह के लजीज खानों से लुत्फ़अंदोज़ होते हैं। इसके अलावा एक दूसरे को तोहफ़े भी पेश किए जाते हैं, जिसमें गुरबा का ख़ास ख्याल रखा जाता है। ये त्यौहार हज़रत ईसा की याद में मनाया जाता है। ईसा मसीह, जिन्होंने हमदर्दी, इंसानियत, अमन और सलामती की तालीम दी और साथ साथ इज्ज़ो इंकसारी में ज़िंदगी गुजार कर इंसानियत की भलाई के लिए बहुत सी रवायात कायम की। पड़ोसियों का ख्याल रखना, भूखों को खाना खिलाना, महाजरों, मुसाफरों और मज़लूमों की हद्दुल-इम्कान मदद करना इनकी तालीमात में शामिल था। महाजर और मज़लूम यूक्रेन से हों या शाम से या दुनिया के किसी भी किनारे से हों, सस्कैचुअन इनको खुशामदीद कहता है। आज के दौर में कनाडा, ख़ास तौर पर सस्कैचुअन, दुनिया में अमन के सफ़ीर से पहचाना जाता है। इसके साथ साथ पूरी दुनिया के मसीही बरादरों को मेरे ख़ानदान की तरफ से और पूरी असम्बली की तरफ से क्रिसमस की मुबारकबाद। शुक्रिया जनाब स्पीकर।
Message doins in dat no het wel no niet dat ik order hitlin dan hij het genoeg al niet dan laat iets aan het wel de dan ik zie het nog niet hoe dat dan is toen net in die bezet in de honing dan no dat dan is bij aan het essay dan is in de honing dan John dat niet nee de komt u dan is iets la doen toe chonask het is een het algale dan is gaan nog aan niet delen nog had dat delen doen Thale millennial Ko je dan ubets itiu dan ook atole honit dan John dan unik en de holund dan ik hobanil dan la dan no ko nog de nog pa herel jan o leo dan is so net in de inebets nieuw dat hinoni de herin child in nathenoni de rit herin chala Als dat dan bekenus nieuw dan dan ik god husin als dat bekenus nieuw as senator Uliao conduits in that no halhuthi. Dan is net in its own liun, dan is habits et did any venum. The hunt unoni the red and a beni a dine ow. Ani ow, dan bestowed him benoniho. Has collar as hanets in telo, then a senet liun, then a salute in a sanateo contun in dehoning then. A ajanta horlun, then a had not earth hill yai, horlun conohanil then, mercy.
Question period. I recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, this session has been about priorities, and it's clearer than ever that this tired, out-of-touch Sask Party government isn't focused on the priorities of Saskatchewan people. That's right from day one, when a senior member of that government invited Colin Thatcher, a convicted wife murderer, to attend the throne speech, we've seen an old and tired government with no respect for regular people and no respect for the struggles that too many families in our province are facing. My question is this: why is the Sask Party government ignoring reality and raising fees, taxes, energy and power bills when so many people in this province are struggling just to get by?
Recognize the Deputy Premier.
Mr. Speaker, it's disappointing that every day the NDP come into this House talking gloom and doom and running down Saskatchewan. Yes, there are challenges. There are challenges here across our country and globally, and there's more that needs to be done and more that we have done within our budget. But here's what else is happening in our great province. We have 1.2 million people for the first time ever. We have the fastest growing economy in the country and the second lowest unemployment rate in the country. Billions of dollars of private sector investment have been dedicated to this province for new projects. We're hiring more nurses, more doctors, we're doing more surgeries, we're building highways, schools and hospitals, and we balanced the budget, Mr. Speaker. We paid down $1 billion in our debt, Mr. Speaker, and we just finished sending everyone a check for $500, something that the NDP supported, and that's growth that works for everyone.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Finance Minister seems offended by us bringing forth the reality that Saskatchewan people are facing. But this is the concern that we hear right across this province. And leadership, Mr. Speaker, is about making choices. Every step of the way, that's a government that seems dead set on making the wrong ones. In an affordability crisis, they've slapped a tax on just about everything: agribition, curling games, rider games. People just trying to have a little fun this winter, Mr. Speaker, yet here again comes a Sass party, nickel and diming regular folks again and again. Now, you'd think that the cupboards were bare the way that this Conservative government threw taxes on everything. But no, Mr. Speaker, they've lost the plot, sitting on billions of windfall revenues while people fall further and further behind. Again, why is this government making life so much more expensive when people are struggling just to get by?
Hear, hear. Recognize the Deputy Premier.
Hear, hear. Mr. Speaker, if I sound offended, it's because I'm offended by the negative attitude that the members opposite have to this great province. The fact that they are not proud of the province of Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker. And she talks about leadership. And we do have leadership in this province. That's why our Premier in this province has a 56% approval rating. So the NDP can keep running down our province. They can keep saying that there's nothing to be proud of here. We on this side of the House are very proud of Saskatchewan. We know there's work to do, and we're up to doing it, Mr. Speaker. And we are extremely proud of the province of Saskatchewan and the people that live here.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
The Finance Minister seems to have conflated. I think that they've used the quote enough to know that I think this province has a heck of a story to tell. My problem is with the decisions being made by that government, a tired, out-of-touch Sass Party government. And despite their spin, they've presided over some of the worst full-time growth numbers in the country. And instead of focusing on job creation, they're focused on their own political projects, like a new provincial police force, or hiring tax collectors at untold costs. Mr. Speaker, why is this government focused on their own pet projects instead of being focused on the things that actually matter to the people of this province?
Recognize the Deputy Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the NDP leader does not have to just listen to us. She can also look at what other people are saying about our province. As I quoted before in this House, David Byko, the finance specialist, had this to say. He said, and I quote, "Saskatchewan is one of the most affordable provinces for living and raising a family," Mr. Speaker. Just recently, on December 1st of this year, what did the Conference Board of Canada have to say? They said this, and I quote, "We expect Saskatchewan's GDP growth to lead the country in 2022. That's not all, Mr. Speaker. What did Nova Scotia say in their mid-year commentary, Mr. Speaker? December 1st, 2022. They said this, and I quote, "Saskatchewan's strengthened fiscal position gives the province plenty of advantage over its peers in weathering the upcoming downturn," Mr. Speaker. They may not agree with all of these specialists, Mr. Speaker, but we don't agree with them.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, it's quite a list of out-of-province specialists, I believe she called them, but let's listen to the 60% of people in this province who tell us that they are worse off this year than they were last year. Again, a tired and out-of-touch government, and regardless of how much they like to deflect blame, the mess in healthcare is theirs to own. Mr. Speaker, it's not the feds, it's not New Democrats from decades ago. This is their own mess. And yesterday, the auditor confirmed what we all knew to be true. It's going to take a lot more than their 4-point plan to fix it. Does the Premier accept any responsibility for the healthcare staffing crisis laid bare yesterday in the auditor's scathing report?
Hear, hear. Recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm more than proud to talk about our most ambitious plan in the country to be able to recruit, retain, incentivize, and train individuals for Saskatchewan's healthcare, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have healthcare workers that are in our post-secondary education. The Minister of Rural and Remote Health and myself have gone through these educational institutions and been able to talk to the individuals. And you know what, Mr. Speaker? They're excited about working in Saskatchewan. They're excited about the incentives. They're excited about the 175 opportunities, Mr. Speaker, that we have new. 140 Filipino work. 140. Mr. Speaker, we're very proud of the nurses that we've recruited that are OR nurses, they are ER nurses, these are ICU nurses. Mr. Speaker, not just from across the world, but Mr. Speaker, also in Saskatchewan, around Canada, the 140 doctors that we've been able to get, Mr. Speaker, in a very challenging time in the last 15 months. More to say on this. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the provincial auditor had a lot to say about their health care plan and the gap that has been created by this government, but I don't think she's called it the best in the country. Now, Mr. Speaker, for Jolene Van Alstine, for Dream Pratt, for Kristen Altieri, and for Shane Turner's family, that government's plan to make a plan means nothing. Like so many others, they were failed by our broken health care system. And I'd like to say that some plan, better late than never, but the cost to patients and their families has simply been too great. Healthcare workers, family doctors, and now the provincial auditor have all implored this government to do more. How exactly will the Premier ensure that we have the 2,000 healthcare workers needed to keep our healthcare system afloat?
Recognize Minister of Rural and Remote Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister of Health just spoke previously about some of the work being done as part of the four-point plan to recruit, train, incentivize, and retain healthcare workers. Mr. Speaker, there's positive steps happening, and we're starting to see some of the results of that four-point plan, Mr. Speaker, of the number of positions that have been enhanced and added, new full-time positions in the province as part of that four-point plan that was announced back in September. Mr. Speaker, I can report that 77 of those positions have been filled under that initiative. Mr. Speaker, 75% of all of these hires have been to permanent full-time positions that were either temporary, casual, or part-time. And that's what the Minister of Health and I heard as part of our tours this summer, Mr. Speaker, hearing from frontline healthcare workers. They wanted to see more permanent jobs, more full-time work. Mr. Speaker, this government has acted on that. The healthcare workers that were very grateful for the work that they are doing in health facilities right across this province, they're taking these positions. Mr. Speaker, yesterday I spoke to a group of nurses at Sask Poly here in Regina. They're excited about working in our healthcare system. They know about our four-point plan, and they know about the incentives, and they're looking forward to being part of the Saskatchewan success story, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon-Fairview.
Mr. Speaker, the provincial auditor was crystal clear. Their plan is not working. It is not enough, Mr. Speaker. This government is not focused on fixing the broken healthcare system. If they were, we wouldn't have people coming to this assembly to beg for the care they need. Jolene wouldn't still be waiting for a meeting with the minister. Shane Turner's family would have an inquest called to find out what went wrong and how we can stop the tide of overdose deaths in this province. And instead of taking the list of doctors accepting new patients off the internet, this government would have worked to fix it. Why not commit to using windfall revenues to get people the care they need?
Recognize the Minister of Rural and Remote Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And in the case of Jolene, I offered to meet that day, and it didn't work for her. We're going to try and find that opportunity to meet with her at an opportunity that works best for her, Mr. Speaker. I spoke to some of the announcements and some of the investments that we announced earlier this September as part of the four-point plan to help address some of the temporary service disruptions we have around this province, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this builds on previous work. On previous work that's been done. In 2020, Mr. Speaker, there was a press release that went out that talked about addressing some of the challenges when it came to laboratory and X-ray technologists, Mr. Speaker, where we announced back in September of 2020 that we'd be doubling the number of seats at the CLXT program by admitting another 20 students in early 2021. Mr. Speaker, graduates from that first year of that CLT seat expansion are now entering the workforce as we speak, Mr. Speaker. It's why we have 2 new CLXTs that have been recruited to the CAMSAC hospital Hospital in November. It's why we have 3 new CLXTs recruited to St. Anthony's Hospital in Esterhazy in November. Mr. Speaker, this is some of the good work that's happened in the past. We're going to continue to do that work in the months and years ahead on behalf of the people of Saskatchewan.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon Fairview.
Mr. Speaker, the provincial auditor's report is very clear. Their plans are not enough. Last year, our health system lost 600 more health workers than it gained, and this government's plan simply isn't enough to close the gap. Meadow Lake, L'Orange, and PA alone need 700 healthcare workers over the next 5 years, and there's no plan for retention. The auditor is concerned that this government has no plan to keep the healthcare workers we've got. Healthcare workers have been clear, very clear. They can't go on like this, and they're ready to leave the workforce. What is the plan to make sure they stay?
Recognize the Minister of Rural and Remote Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we've said many times before, the plan is the 4-point plan that is on the government website. It's on the main page, Mr. Speaker. It's to recruit, train, incentivize, and retain healthcare workers, Mr. Speaker, to recruit 1,000 more healthcare workers over the next number of years, Mr. Speaker, to add more training seats, which have started this fall, Mr. Speaker, adding more incentive packages to recruit and incentivize more healthcare workers into our healthcare facilities, the creation of new full-time positions, the enhancement of part-time and temporary positions, Mr. Speaker. I've talked about some of the hiring that's happened when it comes to CLXTs in a number of communities. We can go down the list, Mr. Speaker. Bigger and District Health Centre resume providing 24/7 emergency services with recruitment of 4 new registered nursing staff. Weyburn Hospital, 4 new RNs and an LPN. Prairie Health Centre in Cabri, an X-ray tech, which has allowed them to restore lab X-ray and ECG services at that facility. Balcarres Health Facility, new CLXT there. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to EMS in Beauval, successfully recruited for all their vacant positions, fully resumed service in Beauval. Same thing in L'Orange, Mr. Speaker. That is some of the positive work that is happening, Mr. Speaker, and the positive work is going to continue on behalf of the health care workers of Saskatchewan.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon Fairview.
Mr. Speaker, it's great that they have a plan to recruit 1,000 healthcare workers, but we need 2,000 as identified in the provincial auditor's report. The auditor's report was scathing, Mr. Speaker, and she was clear. This government's plan came too late and doesn't do enough to close the staffing gaps across the province, gaps that leave the community of Meadow Lake with over 5,000 residents unable to deliver babies on weekends. Does the minister honestly think that in the birthplace of Medicare, moms should be expected to deliver their babies on a Monday to Friday schedule?
Recognize the Minister of Rural and Remote Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We recognize the importance of making sure that we stabilize these services across Saskatchewan, including the obstetrical services in rural communities, Mr. Speaker, where they may be temporarily disrupted. The Ministry of Health and the SHA are working diligently to address the shortage of anesthesiologists that is occurring in some areas of the province, Mr. Speaker. We know that we have challenges that we're facing when it comes to recruiting healthcare workers, not just here in this province, but across this nation, Mr. Speaker. It's why we're taking the steps that we are taking as part of the Health Minister's recruitment mission to the Philippines last week, which is already starting to show some of the benefits of that, Mr. Speaker. The expansion of training seats in this year's budget, Mr. Speaker, and discussions happening now about how we can perhaps further expand that in the months ahead, Mr. Speaker, in next year's budget. And there's positive response to this, Mr. Speaker, such as from the mayor of Assiniboia, Mr. Speaker, who said, quote, "We appreciate you and your government support as we work together to find solutions to our rural health care shortage." From Mayor Sharon Schonberg, Mayor of Assiniboia, Mr. Speaker, they're grateful for the work that's being done.
Hear, hear. Recognize the member from Regina University.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, you hear it loud and clear. The government only willing to listen to people telling them they're doing such a good job, and they're unwilling to listen to people who tell them that they need help. Mr. Speaker, we're joined again today by parents desperate to feed their babies, moms struggling with the formula shortage. And you know, Mr. Speaker, it's gotten so bad that parents are relying on Facebook to identify which stores actually have formula. And this is today in Saskatchewan. That should not be acceptable to any member of this household. And Mr. Speaker, these parents are here again today because they were frustrated. They were angered last week by the minister's comments that there was formula on the shelves. But Mr. Speaker, the shelves are bare, and there has been no action and no acknowledgement from this government on the crisis. We called for a committee that could look into supply chain issues impacting things like formula, and parents are here again today begging. So, Mr. Speaker, why? Why did the Sask Party government block that investigation?
Here. Recognize Minister of Health.
Here. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the moms and their children from coming down to the Assembly, Mr. Speaker. We have been assured that the supply chain was challenged over the last few months, Mr. Speaker, but we have been told, working with the federal government, that this is going to be rectified in the very near future, Mr. Speaker. I do disagree with the member opposite. The shelves are not bare, Mr. Speaker. There is baby formula out there, Mr. Speaker. But it is a challenge to get to. And as a parent of 4, I completely understand, Mr. Speaker, that there are challenges and children get very used to a specific formula. We're working with the federal government, we're working with the supply chain to be able to make sure that we can get that formula for not just the parents here, but all across Saskatchewan and the country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Here. Recognize a member from Regina University.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. If the minister was listening to parents on the issue of formula, he would know that the formula that's available is the most expensive specialized formula. The everyday regular brands that parents need to feed their kids is out of stock. People are driving to North Dakota, driving to other provinces just to feed their babies. And Mr. Speaker, this is a government that has no issue picking fights with the feds, standing up for Saskatchewan people when it fits their political agenda. I don't know how standing up for babies getting fed doesn't fit their political agenda, but here we go, radio silence. Mr. Speaker, why? To the minister, why will you not make this a priority? Again, will you agree to an investigation into supply chain issues, and why? Mums and families and caregivers in Saskatchewan are having such a hard time securing formula to feed their babies.
Here. Recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As I mentioned in my previous answer, we are working with the federal government and other provinces to see about the availability of formula. Mr. Speaker, this is just not unique to Saskatchewan. This is across Canada. And Mr. Speaker, from what I am being told, Mr. Speaker, this is a labeling issue. We have reached out to the federal government to be able to find out if there's anything that we can do to assist. I've written the Minister of Health. I've also contacted him directly about this, Mr. Speaker, to be able to make sure that we do have formula here for children of Saskatchewan. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Here. Recognize the member from Regina University.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A labeling issue. Just next door in Alberta, Danielle Smith imported 5 million doses of Tylenol despite the labeling issues to ensure that parents in Alberta had access to fever medication. Other provinces have acted on formula. Manitoba, BC, they acted months ago to preserve the formula supply for parents in their provinces. But this government is doing little, if anything. The message that this minister is sending to parents in Saskatchewan is enjoy your drive to Minot, enjoy filling up your tank to drive across the border to buy food to feed your baby. The very least that this government could do is look into the supply chain and distribution issues to find out why this is such a chronic issue in Saskatchewan. To the minister, Mr. Speaker, why? Why will they not investigate this today?
Recognize Minister of Finance.
All right. Things are going to change in health, I can tell you that. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Again, I do empathize that there are some challenges out there. I have recognized it, the government recognizes that, and they've asked me to reach out to the federal minister. I have, as of November 22nd, I reached out to the federal minister to be able to say that there are supply chain issues, not just with formula, but with also infant medication, Mr. Speaker. I've been told that infant medication is now arriving in pharmacies across Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker, to be able to fill that void. The medication is coming here to be able from the federal government to make sure that individuals do have their child Advil and Tylenol. Mr. Speaker, I do recognize that there are some challenges out there, Mr. Speaker, but we are working with our federal government and also with our provincial counterparts to make sure that the parents have what they need. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognized member from Regina Rosemont.
Mr. Speaker, we've called for an investigation into supply chain issues impacting families like these at the grocery store, but that investigation would also have looked into prices that are so high at the meat counter and why so few of those dollars are making their way back to beef producers. Producers that are getting an unfair deal in selling their cattle. The stock growers have been clear in calling for this. When former Premier Brad Wall was asked, he said, quote, "I don't think anything should be ruled out," end quote. More talking about it can't hurt. Why won't the Sask Party focus on what matters and investigate what's going on with meat pricing to deliver fairness for producers and consumers?
Hear, hear. Recognize Minister of Agriculture.
Hear, hear. Well, one thing I can say, Mr. Speaker, is this government and me as the minister have never ever dismissed the agriculture industry in this province, and I've always been there to support it. As I've said in my previous answers to the member opposite, there's one of the costs that we do know that is impacting food, right from the supply chain right to the end use, and that's the carbon tax. There's a carbon tax on every transportation mode that a product is used in this province, Mr. Speaker, and out of this province. He talks about a committee being struck. There's a federal committee looking at that now. They have a lot more jurisdiction than a provincial government would. Most of the supply companies food supply companies are outside the province of Saskatchewan. We'd have no jurisdiction in calling them in to have meetings to discuss pricing of food. The federal committee will come with a report, and we look forward to that report, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member from Regina Rosemont.
What a weak response from a government that's lost its way, Mr. Speaker. Instead of focusing on what matters to families, like the cost of living, being able to feed your kids, fairness for producers, they're focused on themselves, playing to their base, starting a costly provincial police force, spending tens of millions of dollars hiring tax collectors, bigger government, red tape for small businesses that'll be forced to file. Twice it makes no sense. Why won't the finance minister scrap this foolish, backwards plan to create a Saskatchewan revenue agency before more money is wasted?
Recognize the finance minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and more bluster from the member opposite, which he does regularly, quite frankly, and the gloom and doom and the assumption that no matter what we do, he needs to criticize it, Mr. Speaker. If he had a business, and I did have a business in the past, doing additional schedules varies from one business to another depending on what business you have, and this would indeed, when this happens, should it happen, which will be a few years in the future, there may be an additional schedule or two. Something that is done in Alberta. We're not inventing a wheel here, Mr. Speaker. What I don't hear that member opposite talk about is what's actually happening in our province for the economy. He doesn't actually talk about the fact that we now have over $14 billion of private sector investment committed to our province, which is going to create thousands of jobs, Mr. Speaker, and generate taxes for our province. That is growth that will work for everyone.
It's Christmas. I recognize the member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's freezing outside, and we're in for an extreme winter. Over the course of this session, we have asked again and again what the minister's plan is to get people into housing and prevent more freezing deaths. We've seen the federal government step in with dollars, Mr. Speaker. We've seen local governments step it up. But we've seen no new commitments from this Minister of Social Services. He seems to think everything is under control. So, to the Minister, will he guarantee that there will be no additional freezing deaths between today and when we reconvene in the spring?
Hear, hear.
Recognize the Minister of Social Services.
Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, I completely disagree with the member opposite. I talked earlier in this session about in-ear supports, Mr. Speaker, for those most vulnerable, including Saskatoon Tribal Council Wellness Centre in Saskatoon, one operated by Ritzis here in Regina. In-year funding for that, Mr. Speaker, the Sway-Toten project up in Saskatoon, several others with third-party CBO partners, Mr. Speaker, as well as shelter space increases, Mr. Speaker, $1.7 million in a year. We hope the members opposite support that as well, doubling the amount of shelters that are available, Mr. Speaker. There's a serious issue, and Mr. Speaker will continue to work with our municipal as well as CBO partners on the cold weather strategy. Thank you.
Ministerial statements. introduction of bills, presenting reports by standing and special committees, orders of the day, written questions.
Question number 77 asked by Ms. Wilson.
The Deputy Whip.
I wish to table the answers to questions 77 to 79.
Questions are tabled for 77 through 79.
Question number 80 asked by Ms. Conway.
Recognize the Deputy Whip.
I wish to order question 80.
Paul. Question 80 has been ordered.
Question number 81 asked by Ms. Conway.
Recognize the Government Whip.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to table, where are we here? Table question 81.
Question 81 has been tabled.
Question number 82 asked by Ms. Conway.
I recognize the Government Whip.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I wish to order question 82.
82 has been ordered.
Government orders, third readings, item number 1. Bill number 123, the Election Amendment Act 2022.
I recognize the Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that Bill number 123, the Election Amendment Act 2022, be now read the third time and passed under its title.
It has been moved that Bill number 123, the Election Amendment Act 2022, be now read the third time and passed under its title. Is Assembly ready for the question? Is it the pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion? Carried.
No.
Third reading. What's next? Second readings.
Orders, second readings. Second readings. Bill number 125, Cannabis Control Saskatchewan Amendment Act 2022. Ms. Carr.
I recognize the Minister of SLGA.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is my privilege to rise and introduce the second reading, Bill number 125, the Cannabis Control Saskatchewan Amendment Act 2022. This bill will implement government's measures to create a formal authorization process for the licensing and regulation of on-reserve cannabis retailing and distribution, and update proof of age requirements in cannabis retail stores. Mr. Speaker, the bill today will create legislative authority for First Nations to license and regulate cannabis retailing and distribution on reserve through First Nation cannabis authorities. This authority will be available to any First Nation that enters into an agreement with SLGA as the cannabis authority which meets the requirements of the legislation. Mr. Speaker, we have heard many times from our First Nation colleagues that they wish to see more opportunities to participate in the provincial economy. The amendments contained in Bill 125 will help achieve that. Mr. Speaker, these changes will also assist First Nations to generate additional capacity in regulatory matters which can be used in other areas of concern. The authorities being provided to First Nation cannabis authorities are very similar to those already in place for the Provincial Cannabis Authority, SLGA, and will give these bodies the legislative authority to regulate cannabis retailing and distribution on reserve. At the same time, this bill will allow those First Nations who wish to participate to have regulatory regimes that allow them to access the federally regulated cannabis supply. Mr. Speaker, that means that more communities across this province will have access to safe, regulated cannabis. That also means fewer opportunities for illicit cannabis to be made available to customers in retail environments. Mr. Speaker, the approach we are putting forward today for on-reserve regulation of cannabis is very close to a structure put in place almost 15 years ago for on-reserve charitable gaming. That model has proven to be successful on the gaming side, and we expect it will work well for cannabis. Mr. Speaker, cannabis retail stores are currently required to obtain proof of age from all customers attempting to purchase cannabis or enter a stand-alone cannabis store. This requirement was put in place when cannabis was first legalized in 2018, when we were unsure what impact legalization might have. Mr. Speaker, since 2018, Saskatchewan has developed an effective regulatory regime for cannabis retailing. For the most part, retailers are following the rules associated with retail sales, and we have not found sales to minors in these outlets to be an issue. But we do know that existing age requirements have proven to be an irritant both for retailers and customers. As a result, Bill 125 will slightly relax the proof of age requirements to require proof of age to anyone who appears to be 25 years or younger. Mr. Speaker, I believe the new standard strikes an appropriate balance between reducing red tape for cannabis retailers, increasing convenience for customers, and ensuring cannabis retailers are taking steps to ensure they are not selling cannabis to minors. With that, Mr. Speaker, I will conclude my remarks and move second reading of Bill number 125, the Cannabis Control Saskatchewan Amendment Act 2022. Thank you.
It has been moved that Bill number 125 be now read a second time. Is the Assembly ready for the question? I recognize the member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to offer remarks on Bill 125, the Cannabis Control Amendment Act 2020, on behalf of the official opposition. I listened with interest to my colleague, the member opposite, as she provided some initial comments on this legislation. I note that the question of regulation of cannabis on reserve has been the subject of some controversy and frustration, and certainly there was a need for this government to address this area. Of course, we will be engaging with stakeholders to ensure that the government has gotten this legislation right, that they have engaged in robust consultation, particularly given their concerning pattern of failing in that category on so many fronts, Mr. Speaker. I know that the question of regulating and selling cannabis on reserve was described by some as a jurisdictional gray zone. So there certainly is likely some need for clarity on this issue, Mr. Speaker. But we will be digging in here on this side, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that the government has gotten this legislation right. Our lead critic, the member for Saskatoon-Meewasin, will be spearheading the process of scrutinizing this legislation and engaging with stakeholders, Mr. Speaker, and I look forward to hearing his thoughts on this, as well as from the greater community, from particularly First Nations, Mr. Speaker, and whether this government strikes the right balance, or sorry, this legislation strikes the right balance. So with that, Mr. Speaker, given that it's the last day of this sitting, and I don't have anything additional to say of substance on this legislation, I'm pleased to move to adjourn debate on Bill 125.
The member has moved to adjourn debate. It is a pleasure, Assembly, to adopt the motion. Carried.
Government orders, second readings. Item number 2. Madame, the Honourable Mézières to move second reading of Bill number 126, the Summary Offences Procedure Amendment Act 2022.
I recognize the Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will now move second reading of the Summary Offences Procedure Amendment Act 2022. First Nations have ongoing concerns with the difficulty of enforcing laws and bylaws on Reserve. Muscadet First Nation, Whitecap Dakota First Nation, and the province are currently involved in a pilot project to seek solutions to these challenges. Mr. Speaker, this bill will provide First Nations the option to use the summary offence provisions within the Act to enforce specified laws and bylaws. First Nations will be able to rely on the Act's simplified enforcement procedures, including the use of a summary offence ticket. This would allow enforcement through payment of a fine, similar to how provincial traffic offences are currently handled, rather than going through the court process. Mr. Speaker, these changes represent an important milestone in the implementation project and demonstrate government's commitment to working with First Nations to improve enforcement of First Nations laws and bylaws. Additionally, the proposed changes will make general administrative updates respecting applications to strike a conviction and late charges for fines that are in default. These updates will help clarify and streamline processes under the Act. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to move second reading of the Summary Offences Procedure Amendment Act 2022.
It has been moved that Bill number 126 be now read a second time. Assembly ready for the question. I recognize a member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to provide initial comments on Bill 126, the Summary Offences Procedure Amendment Act 2022. I understand from the comments of the minister opposite that this bill is an attempt by the government to address some of the difficulties of enforcing bylaws on reserve, Mr. Speaker, and it provides the option of using the summary offence provisions as a tool to reserves to address that concern. We on this side, I listened to the minister's comments with interest, Mr. Speaker, and certainly if this is something that was being called for, there may be some role for this, and we will be reaching out to First Nations and local authorities on reserve to do some consultation on this, Mr. Speaker. Certainly we're aware that there has been a call for increased autonomy on reserve to address the issues that impact those communities, certainly. So we'll be digging into whether this is a tool that offers some additional options and ensure that the promise of this legislation is indeed something that will have an impact, Mr. Speaker. Of course, the devil will be in the detail, Mr. Speaker, and I know that the lead critic on this bill, the member for Douglas Park, the House Leader, the House Leader for the Opposition, Mr. Speaker, will be engaging in consultation together with the member for Saskatoon Centre. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to move to adjourn debate on Bill 126, the Summary Offences Procedure Amendment Act 2022.
The member has moved to adjourn debate. Is the pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion? Carried. We'll pause for a moment to see if we can do royal assent right away. am advised that Her Honor the Administrator is here for royal assent. All please rise.
Pray be seated.
May it please your honor, this legislative assembly at its present session has passed a bill which in the name of the assembly I present to your honor and to which bill I respectfully request your honor's assent.
Your Honor, the bill is as follows. Bill number 124, the Election Amendment Act 2022.
In His Majesty's name, I assent to this bill.
Please rise for the departure of her honor. Please be seated. Oh, sorry. Please stand up. Please be seated. I recognize the Government Deputy House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will request leave to make a farewell statement for Christmas.
Leave has been requested for a Christmas message. Is leave granted? Carried.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to start off by thanking the Opposition House Leader for her cooperation and role working together to allow this chamber to function. Thank you to you, Mr. Speaker, for your leadership in the chair and keeping decorum in the Assembly. And of course, thank you to the Clerk's office, especially Greg Putz, who will be retiring, and Iris Lang, who will be the new clerk. Also, thank you to Kathy, Ken, and Rob for all the work that they've done. And Mr. Speaker, there are several other people who help keep this building running smoothly, so thank you to the Legislative Assembly Service, Sergeant at Arms, Broadcast Services, Hansard, cafeteria staff, cleaning staff, and everyone else, Mr. Speaker. And speaking of the building, Mr. Speaker, thank you to the building manager, Steve Beta, and his troubleshooting maintenance team, Jeff Talker and Ralph Ward. As well, thank you to the Legislative District Security, who have done a tremendous job keeping this building safe. And Mr. Speaker, thank you to Ashley Nisley, who is the manager of House Business. Ashley ensures that we are all on script, that we introduce our legislation, and that we have our motions ready. Mr. Speaker, I'd also like to take the time to thank all of the MLAs in the House, especially to our Premier. Our Premier has been a tremendous leader through some incredibly challenging times. His service and leadership continue to be an inspiration for all of us. And Mr. Speaker, I would be remiss if I did not take the time to thank the people of Saskatchewan for making this the best province in Canada. So thank you to them. We wish everyone the best Christmas, the best holiday season possible, to be enjoyed safely with friends and family. And through you, Mr. Speaker, Merry Christmas to all.
Recognize Opposition House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Deputy House Leader for this opportunity to provide some closing remarks at the end of this session. I try to be cognizant of my audience, and I understand that I am, and my speech is the only thing that's stopping this House from adjourning, so I will try and be as brief as possible, Mr. Speaker, but there are several people that I do want to thank, and I do want to take that opportunity. When I was looking, I do first want to mention, I was looking through some old Hansard closing remarks before coming in today, and I was looking at my colleague, my former colleague, Warren McCall's remarks in 2016. When I was first elected in 2016, I was his Deputy House Leader to his House Leader, and it was such an incredible learning experience. He was an incredible mentor to me. He continues to be an incredible mentor to me, and I reach out to him whenever I'm looking for some advice on procedure and strategy, and I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank him for that mentorship. He mentioned in his remarks a quote from another former MLA, Ed Whalen, who said that the two most important words in political life are thank you. And so, like I said, while I'm going to ensure that I am brief in my remarks, it is very important to do this exercise and stop and pause and thank those who are around us, who help us in our duties. First, I want to give some external thanks to this House, our families, our friends, our support staff who allow us to do this work. I know, and we say this often, that it's through their support and through their sacrifice that we're able to do the work that we do here. On top of that, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank all of our constituency assistants, my constituency assistant in particular, Rob Desjardins, but everybody's constituency assistants who serve in this chamber, because we do know that they do a ton of work keeping our offices going, answering the phones while we're here doing our legislative duties. I want to thank those family and friends who've made those sacrifices, but in addition to that, my colleagues for being so understanding of the sacrifices that we all have to make, the juggling that we do in our families. I'm sure members opposite experience a similar thing. I know that we've all been hit in various days with the illnesses that have been going on, the daycare calls that you have to go pick up your kids in the next 15 minutes, and the emergencies, the personal emergencies that many of us experience in our daily lives while we're here. And I just want to thank colleagues for being understanding of each other, of taking the time that we need to address those other important things that happen in our lives outside of this building, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank all public servants who do their good work 365 days of the year. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank all of those who work within this building, in particular the clerks at the clerk's table. Greg, of course, we gave you some love already. I want to give you some more love. Thank you so much for your guidance and your wisdom throughout the years, but this session in particular, I've very much appreciated. And to the rest of the clerks at the table, Iris, Kathy, Ken, thank you so much, and Rob as well. Thank you so much for all that you do in this building. I also want to thank library service, broadcast services, cafeteria, Hansard, all of those in security, the Sergeant at Arms, the press gallery, building management, and the pages. There's so many people who work in this building every single day who help keep this building going, Mr. Speaker. I also want to give some thanks to our leader, the member for Lakeview, for her steady guidance, her humble leadership, and the way she's set an example for all of us on what service and hard work looks like. I also want to take the opportunity to thank committee clerks and staff as that work continues on. We're always appreciative of the guidance that you provide us in making sure that our committees run as smoothly as possible. I also want to take the opportunity to thank the government House Leader as well as the government Deputy House Leader for the relationship that we've had over the course of this session and making sure that, as the Deputy Government House Leader said, we're able to keep things running as smoothly as possible. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank those who work in the Government House Leader's House Business staff team, Ashley and Jared in particular, for working with our staff team, who I want to give a particular shout out to, first of all, our caucus management team, Kat, Brock, and Mitch. In particular, the one I work the most closely with, Mitchell Bonikoski, who is not just an amazing trumpet player and dad, but an incredible, and a hunter,
intelligence agent,
but also a wonderful person to work with, and someone whose knowledge and guidance I lean on very much. Mr. Speaker, I also want to take the opportunity to thank you for all the work that you do, Mr. Speaker, not just during session, but throughout the year. It's being in some sense, the judge of this place is not always the most glorified job in the world, Mr. Speaker, but please know that we all very much appreciate the work that you do. As the Deputy House Leader said, this is a great opportunity for us to give thanks, but also to wish everyone a Merry Christmas and a happy holiday season, and I'd like to express the same sentiment. Thank you.
I would like to take this opportunity to thank everyone for all of their hard work this session, to the members for their many hours of service and the strong commitment to their positions as elected officials of the province of Saskatchewan. I would like to thank the clerks at the table, Greg Putz, Iris Lang, Ken Ring, Kathy Berniak, Rob Park, Danielle Humble-Sellinger, and Ann Drake. Also the staff at the Legislative Assembly Service, Hansard, and the Sergeant-at-Arms. We appreciate all your efforts in keeping us on task, and by doing so enabling the democratic process to run smoothly. Thank you to the cafeteria staff, central services, and building staff and security. Often their hours are very long, working behind the scenes to accommodate the various functions in the building, not only during session but throughout the year. Thank you to all the caucus staff and our constituency staff for their diligence and hard work, especially while the members are in the Assembly. Also would like to acknowledge the pages for the excellent job that they do daily. We appreciate your efficiency and your professionalism. I would also like to thank my staff, Sheila Sterling, Twyla Wilson, Irene Braun, for all of their hard work in keeping the office running smoothly. And on a personal note, Christmas came early to the Weeks family. Lacey and Nick had a little baby girl named Hazel Cindy, 8 pounds, 2 ounces. And one last thank you, a very special thanks to my family for their support. And I wish all the best this holiday season. Drive safely.
Mr. Speaker, I move that this House do now adjourn.
The Deputy House Leaders move to adjourn the House. Is the Assembly ready for the question? Is it a pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion? Carried. According to the parliamentary calendar, the House stands adjourned till Monday, March 6, 2023 at 1:30 p.m.